Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. In the past hour, we just got a huge bit of breaking news. The Department of Justice is investigating Donald Trump. The Washington Post is reporting the DOJ is investigating the ex-president's actions as part of its criminal probe of January 6th. Sources telling the Post that federal prosecutors who are questioning witnesses before a grand jury have asked hours of detailed questions about meetings Trump led in December 2020, January 2021, his pressure campaign on Pence to overturn the election, and what instructions Trump gave his lawyers and advisors about fake electors and sending electors back to the states. Some of the questions focus directly on the extent of Trump's involvement in the fake elector effort led by his outside lawyers, including John Eastman and Rudy Giuliani. Now, of course, at some level, I think we all thought something like this was happening. But there has not been any concrete reporting on this until now. This major news comes tonight as Attorney General Merrick Garland is speaking out for the first time since the January 6th committee wrapped its final public hearing of the summer until the committee returns in September. We're going to play for you his exclusive interview with NBC Nightly News anchor Lester Holt. And it comes, of course, at a key moment for Garland. I mean, all eyes are on Attorney General Garland and the Department of Justice, both of which are under pressure to take action in light of the damning set of facts that have been laid out so rigorously by the committee. Over 8 hearings, the committee showed how Donald Trump and his allies willfully, intentionally conspired to overturn a lawful election, culminating in the attempted coup on January 6th. And I got to say, to nearly every legal expert who watched and listened to the evidence, it seems like there is, while not a slam dunk, definitely a criminal case to be investigated here. And then came news that the day after that 8th and final hearing, Mark Short, he's the chief of staff to Mike Pence, testified before a federal grand jury investigating the insurrection in D.C. And yesterday, we learned that Short wasn't the only Pence official who testified. Pence's chief counsel, Greg Jacob, also appeared before the grand jury, making those 2 officials the most prominent witnesses that we know of that have testified as part of the Department of Justice's criminal investigation before a criminal grand jury. They were both present for key meetings where Donald Trump and his allies tried to pressure Pence into halting the certification of electoral votes on January 6th. Today, we got this stunning report from New York Times publishing previously undisclosed emails that shed new light on the ex-president's fake elector scheme. These are really something else. Quote, the dozens of emails among people connected to the Trump campaign, outside advisors, and close associates of Mr. Trump show a particular focus on assembling lists of people who would claim, with no basis, to be electoral college electors on his behalf in battleground states that he had lost. The author of several of those emails, an Arizona lawyer who helped organize the pro-Trump electors in that state, repeatedly called those very electors fake. That's the word he used. He fully understood what they were up to, writing in an email to Trump campaign advisor Boris Epshteyn, quote, we would just be sending in fake electoral votes to Pence so that someone in Congress can make an objection when they start counting votes and start arguing that the fake votes should be counted. In a follow-up to that message, he wrote, alternative votes is probably a better term than fake votes, adding a smiley face emoji. Whew, nice save there, buddy. Good one. Now, we know that this scheme is part of the Department of Justice investigation. The Washington Post reports that a grand jury issued subpoenas already to 2 Arizona state lawmakers last month seeking communications relating to any effort, plan, or attempt to serve as an elector for Donald Trump or Mike Pence. And those subpoenas are just part of what the Post describes as a significant escalation and expansion of the Justice Department's criminal probe. Around the same time, federal agents fanned out in multiple states to serve subpoenas, execute search warrants, and interview potential witnesses as part of the investigation into the electors' scheme. And amid this massive swirl of activity and speculation and pressure and anticipation, there's Attorney General Merrick Garland, a man who has been completely avoiding interviews, but decided to sit down with Lester Holt. Now, of course, he can't divulge specific details about the investigation. It is still fascinating to hear his perspective at this key moment. Take a listen.
Let's start off and talk about January 6th. We've just watched weeks of some pretty horrific testimony about what led up to January 6th and what happened that day. Just As an American, can you tell me what your impression was of what we heard?
You're talking about the hearings?
The hearings.
Look, I think it is very important. It's an important part of democracy that every American recognizes the truth of what happened on January 6th and in the time surrounding it. I think that this is an important part that we not downgrade or suppress how important that day was. And I think that the hearings did an extremely good job of reminding us, and for people who didn't know in the first place, telling us how important that day was and what a risk it meant for our democracy.
Is the committee offering you anything in terms of an informal roadmap? Are you learning things you didn't know?
Look, the Justice Department has been doing the most wide-ranging investigation in its history, and the committee is doing an enormously wide-ranging investigation as well. It is inevitable that there will be things that they find before we have found them, and is inevitable that there will be things we find that they haven't found. That's what happens when you have two wide-ranging investigations going on at the same time. But the Justice Department has, from the beginning, been moving urgently to learn everything we can about this period and to bring to justice everybody who's criminally responsible for interfering with the peaceful transfer of power from one administration to another, which is the fundamental element of our democracy.
You said you're moving quickly at this. There's been a lot of criticism, a lot of pressure that the DOJ is kind of behind the power curve here, behind the committee, not moving quickly enough on what appears to be solid evidence in some cases.
As I said, we have been moving urgently since the very beginning. We have a huge number of prosecutors and agents working on these cases. It is inevitable in this kind of investigation that there will be speculation about what we are doing, who we are investigating, what our theories are. The reason there is this speculation and uncertainty is that a fundamental tenet of what we do as prosecutors and investigators is to do it outside of the public eye. We do that for two important reasons. One is to protect the civil liberties of people and events that we're investigating, and the second is to ensure the success and the integrity of our investigation.
Would a criminal referral from the committee carry a lot of weight? Would it be welcomed by the Department of Justice?
So I think this is totally up to the committee. We will have the evidence that the committee has presented, and whatever evidence it gives us. I don't think that the nature of how they style the manner in which information is provided is of particular significance from any legal point of view. That's not to downgrade it or disparage it. It's just that that's not the issue here. We have our own investigation pursuing through the principles of prosecution.
You said in no uncertain terms the other day that no one is above the law. That said, the indictment of a former president, of perhaps candidate for president, would arguably tear the country apart. Is that your concern as you make your decision down the road here? Do you have to think about things like that?
Look, we pursue justice without fear or favor. We intend to hold anyone who was criminally responsible for the events surrounding January 6th, for any attempt to interfere with the lawful transfer of power from one administration to another, accountable. That's what we do. We don't pay any attention to other issues with respect to that.
So if Donald Trump were to become a candidate for president again, that would not change your schedule or how you move forward or don't move forward?
Say again that we will hold accountable anyone who is criminally responsible for attempting to interfere with the legitimate, lawful transfer of power from one administration to the next.
NBC News has spoken to some people who are close to the investigation who worry that the department is overwhelmed by just the sheer size of this investigation. We know several hundred people just at the Capitol alone. Do you have a capacity, do the courts have a capacity to see these cases through?
I'm confident that we do. Of course, we'd like more resources, and if Congress wants to give it to us, that would be very nice. But we have people from prosecutors and agents from all over the country working on this matter, and I have every confidence in their ability, their professionalism, their dedication to this task.
How is your department dealing with the pressure? Every day you wake up, there's a column in a newspaper talking about what you will do and when you will do it.
So this I've said before, and I mean it from the bottom of my heart. The only pressure that I, or my prosecutors, or the agents feel is the pressure to do the right thing. That's the only way we can pursue the rule of law. That's the only way we can keep the confidence of the American people in the rule of law, which is an essential part of our democratic system.